Hello, I'm a woman on a mission to assemble a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. This is episode number 7. I'm Kathleen Spracklin. I'm part of LPC, a Lilliputian Publishing Co-op, and we're about trying to train writers and assemble readers and small booksellers and anyone who really cares about analog books and wants to see them survive and see small independent bookstores make it. I'm just sharing with you some casual thoughts and reflections each day. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about a style of reading that is sometimes a little difficult to do, but is very well acknowledged. And what I'm talking about here is syntopical reading. Mortimer Adler and Charles Van Doren wrote a very famous book, How to Read a Book. And it's incredibly in-depth of so much that you can get out of a book other than just opening the first page and reading it straight through. I used to be a sequentialist, and literally I would read the title page and the acknowledgments, a whole bunch of names of people I didn't even know, and read from the start of the book to the end. But it turns out, of course, that that's not the best way to get the most information out of a book. They give you much more in-depth ways of discovering where the writer's going with the book, and some excellent methods to sometimes reduce the amount of time taken to read the book, sometimes going the other way and reading more in-depth. Well, towards the end of the book, in fact, the last section, they talk about a fourth level of reading, which they call syntopical reading. And in that style of reading, you've got a single theme that you're trying to investigate, and you assemble a number of texts at once, and you read these books simultaneously, going back and forth amongst them to form a complete multidimensional view of the topic that you're understanding. It's excellent, but very challenging. You have to have all the books at once, you have to have an enormous amount of desk space, and you better have a very strong short-term memory to keep all the pieces in mind at one time. But there is a much simpler way to do that syntopical reading, and that is using an Zettelkasten. I'm not going to say too much about how to construct an Zettelkasten. I'll mention it here and there. If you want the systematic treatment, this is the book to get, the Zettelkasten by Scott Shepper, and you can reach that at scottshepper.com/Antonet. But why I bring it up is that if you have a filing card system, where really you're taking your notes on these, on 4x6 file cards, you can do syntopical reading sequentially. And what I mean by that is you can read one of the books using the levels 1 through 3 of how to read a book, go through one of the books, collect cards that are what you got out of the book, the meat of the theory, and your thoughts and feelings about what you encountered in that book. And then you can take another book and read that separately and sequentially, just one book at a time. And then when you make the cards that go with your new book and you file them in your Zettelkasten, if they're the same idea, they will end up next to one another or very close to one another in your filing system. And an incredible thing occurs when you put these two cards together. The ideas interact. The point of doing syntopical reading simultaneously is so that all of these different ideas will be present in your brain at once. For me, I'm not a super genius, so my challenge is building up thoughts and forming a structure for them at the same time as I'm trying to compare them. It turns out to give me an overload situation. Whereas if I can build a structure up as a separate thing, reading one book, and then bring the next book into that structure, it's far more approachable. So I can go one book, another book, and another book. But the interesting thing about that is that because you have the cards that encapsulated the first book that you read, when you bring the cards from the second book in contact with them, the ideas from the first card wake up, and they're just as fresh as the minute that you thought them, as the day you read them. And now you have two cards with slightly different perspectives on the same idea interacting, and it's extremely powerful. Very, very powerful. And for me, it's especially powerful because I can focus on one concept at a time and really, really get the meat of the book. So what I'm going to do as I go through this new book that I'm reading, Character Strengths and Virtues by Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman. It's a beast of a book and just phenomenally detailed in an area that interests me tremendously, which is, as I said in my introduction, human motivation. Why do people do what they do? And so, since I've already read a fair amount in that field, as I bring new material from this book into my Zettelkasten, I'm going to get a lot of interplay with cards that are already in my system. And I'm hoping to kind of share some of that with you. So what I'm doing in these early podcasts here is kind of to give you an idea of how this method of syntopical reading sequentially, how it functions. So I'll be breaking it down into smaller steps, although the actual process goes much faster than it would seem from breaking it down into individual steps. Okay, so today I pulled a quote from page 4 of this book. The quote goes as follows: "This handbook focuses on what's right about people, and specifically about the strengths of character that make the good life possible." The quote to me is an excellent quote, especially if you're taking the concepts of how to read a book, because the quote tells you very, very clearly what the purpose of this entire tome is, and it really sets the stage for what's to come. It's a focus on the strengths of character that enable people to lead a good life. Well, that's going to bounce and interplay with a number of ideas that are already in my Zettelkasten. And in fact, immediately I can think of 4 different directions that this one quote could take me in. And I'm going to cover them really, really briefly right now, and we'll break them apart in coming podcasts. Good story. If the character strengths tell you how to lead a good life, then contrasting strengths and weaknesses will tell you something about how to tell a good story. Also, if you're taking individual isolated strengths of character, I think it's exciting to take a whole constellation of character traits. So I'll compare that. And then it would appear that we're both very interested in transformation. I'm very interested in human transformation that's inspired by story, and as stated by Christopher Peterson and Martin Seligman, their interest is establishing methodologies that will help people make the transformation in real life, not just in stories. So join me over the coming days as we go into those 4 topics. And please like and subscribe to my podcast because it will help me reach more viewers. And subscribe to my email list at KathleenSprocklin.com. Thank you, and bye-bye.